All right, guys, this is factoring day 3, and this is actually kind of a review, but it's solving by factoring. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be doing some GCF problems, some goal problems, some AC method problems, and some grouping problems, and we're going to actually solve for x in all of these. So instead of just factoring them, we're going to find out what x actually equals in all of them. Okay? So in order to do this, we have to know one really big thing, and it's called the zero product property. So the zero product property is what allows us to be able to solve something. So the zero product property says if I have two numbers, a times b, and a times b equals 0, then either a has to be 0 or b has to be 0, okay? Because if I have two numbers being multiplied, one of them has to be 0 in order for the answer to be 0, because 0 times anything is 0. So for example, if I have 3 times x and the answer is 0, then because you have two numbers, x has to be 0, because 3 times 0 is the only way to get back to 0. And I feel like I've said 0 like 55 times, okay? So for these questions, okay, you're going to have to factor them first. So when it asks you to solve an equation, you're going to have to first factor using one of our methods, and then you're going to set your factors equal to 0. And then we're going to solve. Okay? So let's just kind of dive right in. So first we're going to look at x squared minus 11x plus 24 equals 0. Okay? So in order to factor this, since it's a trinomial and it does not have an a value, you are factoring using goal numbers. So I want two things that multiply to 24, but add to negative 11. Okay? So factors of 24, you could have 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, or 6 and 4. Okay? Well, if I add those up, I get 25, 14, 11, and 10. Okay, well, none of those equal negative 11. But if you remember, two positives make a positive, but also two negatives. So I could do negative 1 and negative 24, negative 2 and negative 12, negative 3 and negative 8, okay? Or negative 4 and negative 6. But I know that it's going to be negative 3 and negative 8. So those go in here. X minus 3, x minus 8 equals 0. So this is what we did on Wednesday or Thursday, depending on what day you had me. So now we have one thing multiplied by one thing. So this is like our a times b. Well, if the answer is 0, then either a has to be 0 or b has to be 0. So if a is 0, then that means x has to be 3, right? Because I add 3 to both sides. And if b is 0, then I add 8 to both sides, and x has to be 8. So your answers are 3 and 8. So remember I said factor. So we factored here. Set your factors equal to 0, and then solve. And that's all we're doing today. Okay, so let's try another one. We've got 7r squared minus 14r plus 7 equals 0. Well, I should notice right now that all of these have a GCF of 7. So I pull a GCF out, so I get r squared minus 2r plus 1 equals 0. So inside, I can factor this by goal numbers. So I want two things that multiply to 1, but add to negative 2, so it's obviously 1 and 1, or negative 1 and negative 1. Well, that makes 2, and that makes negative 2, so it's these two. So I get x minus 1 equals 0. So now I set each factor equal to 0. Well, these are the same thing, so really you don't need to do it twice, because it's going to give you the same answer. So we get x equals positive 1. Does 7 equal 0? No, it doesn't. So this one is false, so it just goes away. So this one only has one answer. Okay, I'm going to try another one. So we have 9x squared plus x equals 0. So this is a GCF. They both have an x in common, so I pull that x out, and I'm left with 9x plus 1 equals 0. So I set my two factors equal 0. And I solve. Well, this one's done. There's nothing to solve. Subtract 1 from both sides over here, so you get 9x equals negative 1. Divide by 9, so x equals negative 1 over 9. This was a GCF problem. All right, last example, and then you guys are going to get a worksheet. So we have 6x squared minus 11x minus 10 equals 0. So this is an AC method problem. So I multiply a times c, and that gives me negative 60. So I want two things that multiply to negative 60 but add to negative 11. Well, I could do negative 6 and 10, but that's 4. I could do negative 2 and 30. That's 28. I know these are all random. I'm just trying to do this one in my head. You do negative 3 and 20. That's 17. And of course I could reverse all of those, but all those are just going to give me the negative versions of those. You do negative 5 and 12. What that gives me 7 or negative 7. I could do 64 and 15. So I could do negative 4 and 15. That would give me 11. So if I reverse it, I get negative 11. So it's that pair. That took me a while. So I replaced those two in the middle with that. So I have 6x squared plus 4x minus 15x minus 10 equals 0. So we group the first two, group the last two. GCF of the first two is a 2x. Leaves me with 3x plus 2, because you're just dividing those by 2x. GCF of the last two, remember, because its leading coefficient is negative, we pull out a negative 5, which gives me 3x plus 2. So I have 2x minus 5 equals 0, and 3x plus 2 equals 0, because those are my two factors. Those are my two factors. So then I set my factors equal 0, and I solve. So over here I add 5. So 2x equals 5. So x equals 5 halves. Over here I subtract 2, so I get 3x equals negative 2. Divide everything by 3, so I get x equals negative 2/3. And those are your two answers. And that's all. So once you're done taking notes, make sure you show the notes to the sub, and they will give you the pink worksheet for today. And tomorrow we will spend the day reviewing everything that we have talked about.